Illinois is getting closer and closer to a partial government shutdown. That's next on CapitolView. A partial government shutdown is all but inevitable, but Obamacare is here to stay. We'll talk about that and more this week on CapitolView. I'm Amanda Vinicky of Illinois Public Radio and WUIS, joined this week by Chris Mooney. He's the head of the Institute of Government and Political Affairs, or Public Affairs, at the University of Illinois. Also, we have Andy Maloney, my friend, and of course, the Law Bulletin's man in the State House. So let's start with the big news for anybody who follows state politics. We talk all the time, money, money, money. It makes the world go round, right? And the state too. Illinois doesn't have enough of it, ever it seems, but really this time the spending plan that Democrats passed, $4 billion nearly out of balance. That's why Governor Bruce Rauner on Thursday said he had no choice but to veto it. Veto at least almost all of it. Schools, however, on Wednesday, he signed the appropriation for that. So parents need not worry. You still have somewhere to send your kids come fall. Nonetheless, everything else really is going to be without money. So, Andy, why don't we start with you? First of all, were you surprised that Governor Bruce Rauner did this, or is this seem like maybe Democrats were putting him on a stage to do this and he was ready and waiting with that veto pen and couldn't wait to give it a signature?
Yeah, it was not a surprise at all, I think, to anybody who's been following politics even remotely closely for most of the spring session. I mean, he's been talking about how he's not going to sign a budget that doesn't have enough money. He's talked about the $4 billion shortfall. And even though Democrats came back and said, well, the plan you proposed had a shortfall too, because he had some pension benefits that he was calculating, or some pension reforms.
$2 billion worth.
$2 billion worth. He still insisted that he wasn't going to do it without elements of his turnaround agenda, workers' compensation reform, property tax freeze, and some other elements. So this was something that he was telegraphing, I think, for most of us. And so it wasn't a surprise to see him sort of go through with it. And he went ahead and did the outright veto of all of it. It wasn't like he went line by line and said, well, I'm going to take the first crack at trying to sort some of this out. He went ahead and vetoed the whole thing. But like you insisted, or like you implied there, Democrats did wait quite a while to send him the budget bills. So this was something that they were going to make him wait around right up until the deadline for the end of the fiscal year to do.
Because Senate President John Cullerton, I asked him, I said, why are you waiting? And he said, we didn't want them to be vetoed outright. We wanted to give the governor some time to realize what it would mean. They have admitted that their budget is out of balance, but they say it has to be cuts, and this budget does make cuts from the current year. We've only got days left in it, but nonetheless, that their proposal for fiscal year 16 does spend less in many areas than does fiscal year 15. Education does get more money. I talked to one legislator that said, it's disingenuous, and even actually Ounce of Prevention, which is headed by Bruce Rauner's wife, Diana, said, we need more. It's not enough to just give money to schools. There are a whole ton of state programs that help out parents and children and help them to lead happy and successful lives. It's not like you just go to school. They're worried about daycare. They're worried about all of the various mechanisms that support children. So, Chris, what about this notion of a mandatory veto? What did it do for Rauner that he just rejected spending outright versus reducing some things? So say, don't make Ounce of Prevention upset. He's laid out cuts in his own budget, some pretty drastic ones, frankly. And he also says he's taking additional steps. Even before this, he had a budget. He began closing down, for example, the State Museum. So why did he go that route, do you think?
Well, I don't have any insight into what the governor's thinking or what these different facts. I mean, but one thing it's tactical. I mean, they've been playing this game, and surprisingly, there's politics in government, and that's what's going on here. At this moment, it seems to me that all parties, and particularly what we're talking about here is the two Democratic leaders in the legislature and the governor, they're in spin mode. Not that they haven't been up to this point, but right now they've really got to concentrate on telling a story that is a popular story, something they can say, look, this isn't me, I didn't do this, the other guy did it. And they have to make a plausible argument, and all these little nuances, sending, why did the General Assembly send up a budget that was out of balance? It's all part of the game, right? It's part of developing.
They didn't want to
story.
be the ones that made the deep cuts. They didn't want to be the bad guys there.
That's right.
But they also, they have enough Democrats to pass a tax increase that would pay for all of this. Even enough Democrats that could override a veto if everybody stuck together. Mm-hmm. So why don't they do that?
Well, because it's hard, because nobody likes it.
We don't like hard things.
In some sense, people, you saw this from election day on. It was a slow train heading for pickup trucks stuck on the tracks. Everybody saw it coming. Bad things were going to happen. You had a governor who was really calling the bluff in some sense of sort of business as usual. That the state had the structural deficit for a long time, for several years, and that something needed to be done. And the two things that you can do to fix a massive deficit that we had was raise taxes or cut spending. Both of them are painful. So because they're painful, neither side wants to do either one. Now, the Democrats would prefer to raise taxes, the Republicans would prefer to cut, but either way you're going to make somebody mad. So both sides have been sort of playing this game back and forth, and we're watching this train coming down the track, and it's heading for this pickup truck. And the guy's furiously, that's the citizen of Illinois trying to get that thing started, and it's moving very, very slowly, but it's coming, and it'll probably show up on Wednesday, after the midnight. So
is there any way to avoid a quote-unquote shutdown? Basically, on July 1st, Illinois runs out of spending authority. The comptroller no longer can cut checks. With some exceptions, of course. She did have a press conference a couple weeks back, sounded very similar to things that we've heard from Governor Bruce Rauner, who appointed Comptroller Leslie Munger, of course. But she said that she will no longer be able to write, for example, employees' paychecks, but you can cover retirees' pensions, and Illinois will still be able to pay people who hold on to bonds. But Medicaid, for example, sorry, docs, they won't get their paychecks from the state or their reimbursements. Chris, two things. What does, therefore, a shutdown look like, given those nuances? And then to both of you, really, let's move from that question, once we know what it looks like, to, is that what we're heading to no matter what?
Well, in terms of what it's going to look like, it's a little unclear, because part of this is also part of the spinmeister game, right? The governor it's really going to be in the governor's ballpark in terms of figuring out what gets shut down and what doesn't, because he can, this is an emergency or this is essential services. So
can he, when it's essential, is there money to pay for it, or he just
Not
has to say
necessarily.
Jump and they have to say how high because he's the governor and their
Basically,
agency's under his
that's
authority?
Right. So they're not going to shut down Menard Correctional Facility, for example, and let all the prisoners go. So those people will show up, and they just won't get a paycheck in July. Same thing with the State Patrol. Same thing with probably with university employees and so forth. So it's whenever these things happen, it's the chief executive that kind of picks and chooses, and to help, he wants to make it look, or she wants to make it look like a crisis, and also that he or she is the one on the right side of the crisis. So you don't want to just say, well, don't worry, government's shutting down, but you won't even notice. That's not what anybody wants. Because these are hard things they have to do, they have to have a serious crisis in order to say, well, we did everything we could, but I guess we're going to have to raise taxes.
Isn't it to Democrats' advantage to have things look worse? I mean, if Rauner is going on, and he's the one that vetoed the budget, would he be the guy responsible if things are noticeably bad? If you can't go and get your driver's license renewed, is the example that I often get? Or maybe do employees, can they say, no, I don't want to show up for work. You're not paying me. Mm-hmm. This isn't part of the bargain?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it's the chief executive who sort of wears the jacket for that type of thing. I think especially, if people don't have the urge to go back and look at all of the decisions that led up to, okay, now the governor is vetoing the budget. A lot of times maybe what they're seeing right now is just Governor Rauner has vetoed the budget. We're heading toward this partial shutdown. So I think in some ways it's easier to see it that way. We've been talking, of course, about how it's been headed this way for a long time. But until the ball kind of goes back into the legislature's court, be that with, if they talk about it on Tuesday or if the governor proposes some plan that they don't take up, I think it's possible that he, amongst the electorate, could be the one who kind of
will they notice, though, do you think? Is it going to be noticeable?
Well, that's both of these things are I think it's not about objective reality, it's about you guys and how the story gets told and who sells the story in a way that's convincing. And in general, the chief executive has the upper hand in that because he or she is, you'll come, the reporters will come and see him anytime the governor shows up. He'll report what he says. Trib will print whatever he wants. And
the editorial board will
more or
love
less, op-ed or not. And, well, that's unfair. But the legislature is just a very unusual institution. People don't understand it. It's a little creepy. They're not, but everybody knows what a governor is. He's the boss. He's daddy, and so that person has the bully pulpit and can really, if they stay on if the governor stays on message and is a clear and consistent message, and if they can spin it right, the governor should be able to win this PR battle. We've seen that at the federal level with Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich back in '96. It's several states this has happened to in the last 10 years. New Jersey, John Corzine, our old boy from Taylorville when he was governor of New Jersey, he had the same situation. And what did he do? He closed down the state parks on the coast in 4th of July weekend. That created a crisis. He said, look, they didn't give me enough money. They're shut down. He becomes, he has to say it, but he can blame it on the other. And who's going to gainsay him, right? Nobody knows, they don't have the bully pulpit that the governor has.
And I think in some ways when you talk about storytelling, that's an apt point because we've seen the speaker kind of take that idea each week when they've come back on Tuesdays to talk about workers' comp reform or whatever it is. And he's come in and given essentially the same sort of speech, right? The governor is functioning in the extreme, not in moderation. Democrats want to function in moderation, et cetera. So I think he understands that as well and maybe knows, having been around for a long time, that it can be the case where the governor has the upper hand, and so he's trying to maybe take the narrative and sort of get out in front of it in a way.
Well, of course, the speaker has said he's not going to air any commercials while the governor has that going through the month. That isn't subsiding. I do find it interesting, and I wonder if it helps Rauner to have these commercials because he doesn't have to just rely on the press. And in fact, he hasn't had immediate availability since these ran, other than when there was, unfortunately, at least 9 tornadoes hit in Coal City, and yet he took only on-topic questions in relation to disaster recovery. Didn't at all broach the topic of the state budget. He hasn't answered any questions. We haven't heard from him at all. The speaker has been more of a frequent, at least weekly visitor to the state capitol press room. But with these commercials, is Rauner helping to get his point across? Or because there has been such an ado made about these being paid for by his political action committee, I know I've had people say to me, hey, if he's got all that cash to be running these things, why doesn't he put it into the state instead of a shutdown? Or is that just an unrealistic connection? Or is that one that you think voters will grab onto and hurt Rauner's attempts?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen any polling on that. The whole thing is a little bit confusing. Why is he doing this? I mean, it's a classic campaign ad. You get the half in black and white and the scary music and the half with the goofy candidate saying, hey, I'm here to help you out. I'm going to help you. That's, but then there's no vote, there's no election. People, what's going on with this? So it's hard to know how that's going to play. If nothing else, it's another way of pushing his message. And that may be why he's limiting the press availabilities because they're trying to keep that message very clear, and they don't trust the governor to stay on topic. And
he's good at that, though.
Yeah, I don't quite understand why they don't let him out there, because that, and maybe they will soon. Maybe that'll be the next step. But the commercials themselves, I guess it remains to be seen what, if anything, is going to be impacted. But one thing it definitely demonstrates, in an inside baseball thing, is this guy's got money to blow. And if he can,
he's gonna.
He's gonna. And if he's gonna go out there and spend $1 million this week, $1 million next week, state legislators who may be sitting in a district and thinking about a primary opponent or being in a swing seat, being challenged from the Republican side, they might be questioning. Because $1 million in a state house race, that's a significant amount of money.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. So we never really got to the question. Just wanting to make sure Wednesday is the start of the month. But is there any chance that Illinois avoids this? Will there be an agreement come July 1? Or I had said it's all but inevitable. It appears like it's pretty darn. They're going quickly on that track at this point, and it's going to be very tough to pull the brakes by July 1.
Yeah, if there's an agreement pending that's going to come about before July 1st, I haven't heard of it. I don't think anybody has heard of it. We haven't seen the leaders of the legislature and Governor Rauner agree on too much, so it's hard to imagine sort of the ways that they could maybe, like you said, pull the brakes on this thing before the fiscal year ends. We did see in his editorial today announcing that he was vetoing the budget, the governor mentioned Senate President Cullerton and how he wants to incorporate part of his pension plan going forward. So maybe that's a little bit of an angle that he's trying to say.
It seems like he's
trying
making
to compromise.
an overture.
Yeah, a little bit. But then President Cullerton spokesman came back and said he's letting the middle class suffer, I think, something along those lines. So it seems like the overture, at least for today, didn't work. And I don't know how they agree to a solution in the next 5 days.
So Chris, this is going to happen.
You never know. They could pop out at 3 o'clock and say everything's good, but I doubt it. The key thing is
what's the percentage chance of this getting fixed?
I don't know. It's between 0 and 100, but I'm not sure where.
I'm going to go with 0.5.
Okay. But the speaker's got to get involved here, and that's really, that seems to be, as an outsider watching it, this looks like a battle between Mike Madigan and Bruce Rauner, trying to figure out. There's policy differences, absolutely. They really have different sort of visions for the state in some sense. I don't think they're diametrically opposed, but they certainly on a tactical level about what should get done and when, I think they have significant differences. But it's also about who's got the power, who's in control, and President Cullerton. He's not going. He's kind of caught in the middle in some sense here, and but the governor has to get both the House and the Senate to get anything done, and that requires dealing with both leaders.
So who's winning right now?
I don't know who's winning, and I don't know we're going to know for a little bit. It's one of those things you're going to know in a retrospect, because number one, it's a battle of public opinion that they're fighting right now. And then it's a test of wills and how willing each, dare I say it, the speaker on the one hand and the governor on the other, are willing to push this and increase the crisis to get what they want. Generally what happens, it's a budget. The budget items are far easier to negotiate than most non-budget items, because you could say, well, you want 50, I want 100, let's call it 75 and go home.
Yeah, the speaker even said the revenue will be the easy part.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but nobody wants to vote for it. But they'll get them on, and it'll happen. They'll work it out. But I'm not so sure they're going to, they may not work it out until leaves fall. But that's not usually how these things play out. Hopefully they'll crank it up, make it a big crisis, and in a week or two they'll get it fixed.
But right now you don't think either man is ahead?
I would not venture a guess on that.
Yeah, I wouldn't venture a guess either. I've said before, sometimes trying to figure out who's ahead and who caused what. And Springfield is like trying to find the end of the magician's handkerchief. It just keeps coming out of the sleeve. So, I think.
And it's always different than it actually appears.
Right. Yeah. I think you're right, though. In retrospect, maybe we'll have some better insight. And it also depends on how you want to gauge that. I mean, do you want to use the election or who gets what they want in terms of policy, in terms of the budget? So those are different criteria, I think, in terms of if you're trying to gauge who's winning.
Do we make anything of the quote-unquote compromise that the governor says he's offered in the Chicago Tribune editorial that was issued just minutes before the actual veto? He said that he would go along, he still wants property tax freeze, but he said it would only last 2 years, and that it would be accompanied at Senate President Cullerton's request with a change in how the state funds schools. He was putting off exactly how that'll happen until the end of 2016, just that something would happen. And then he also appeared to back off some on redistricting, so how legislative districts are drawn, and also his term limits initiative, saying that he wanted the leaders to publicly commit to doing that, although it didn't have to happen right away. And I think that's in part because that's really difficult for legislators to do, but also Senate President Cullerton has said that he only deals with constitutional amendments in the second part of a General Assembly's 2-year session. So are these real compromises or not? I mean, Republicans say, hey, we're giving, and Democrats aren't, but is this just another fake out by Rauner?
I wouldn't say it's a fake out, but it is part of the spin game. He's got. I'm reasonable, Larry. I'm trying to help out. What am I? This is. I'm giving. Where's the give on the other side? And that's where he's got the advantage because he says that you report it. It's in the papers, and it sounds like the word compromise. Count up the number of times that the word compromise is said in that 500-word op-ed piece that he published, and you'll see that's what he's trying to. He's trying to show that he is a reasonable person. And the other side, if they're not getting their message out, if they don't make it clear that they are also being reasonable and trying to compromise in their own way, in different ways, or counter that narrative, then the governor is going to be, seen as a more reasonable person and probably get the benefit.
Do we make anything of, there was also a vote this week. So the Illinois House is coming back on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. The Senate will be there too. Tuesday, talking about what a government shutdown would look like and the consequences that would have. The House this prior week did vote on one element. They're saying, hey, look, as proof that we're compromising, we voted out and passed privatization of the state's economic and commerce department. That's something that Bruce Rauner had wanted. And then also they took a vote on a sort of reprieve for Chicago Public Schools, which have a huge $600 million plus pension payment coming up also on June 30th. And it failed. What do we make of that? The governor's folks are saying that Speaker Madigan killed it. Madigan says, it wasn't me.
Well, I think one thing that was perhaps not telling, but fascinating was you had the speaker sort of, when questioned about that, kind of be a little bit coy and just say, well, that's how it works in America. You don't have enough votes. I mean, he wasn't, it seemed like, at least from the material I looked at, going out of his way to kind of put a certain narrative on that. It was just sort of like, hey, that's democracy, baby.
And we're going to try again.
Yeah. But anywho, it's one of those things where I think it gets back to, it's hard to tell who's compromising and who's being reasonable because you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. We can speculate, we can make what we want to of, for instance, the governor's friendship with Mayor Emanuel and this battle with the speaker. But it's difficult, I think, in that scenario to know, what exactly to make of it.
So, Chris, I guess another June 30th deadline that factors into this is the AFSCME contract. We've talked about shutdown, and we have, of course, the bulk of state workers are unionized. That's something that clearly Governor Bruce Rauner isn't too keen on. There is a federal lawsuit ongoing with fair share contracts, but we're still waiting to see. Right now, both sides say it's not going well, right?
Right. Yeah, this is sort of the undiscussed story, I think, mostly because it's hiding in the smoke-filled rooms, so to speak, or what used to be smoke-filled rooms of union negotiations. And I think it seems to me that the unions are usually the ones that to come out of these negotiations. If they're going bad, they come up and they make a lot of noise and they have press conferences and they do picketing and stuff. And there's been a little bit of that, but they haven't gone all out yet. And usually that'll happen before there's any kind of strike. I mean, to have a state worker strike would be a big deal, and it's not out of the question, but we're going to they're going to telegraph that move a long time, so they'll in advance, and they've gone past deadlines before. But one thing it doesn't do is help with morale for state workers who are have been in a morass since early retirement of George Ryan and through the Blagojevich hell, and now they get this and a boss who's constantly harping on how terrible of a job they're doing. Not a good time to be a state worker.
And it appears as if Rauner is offering them, he says, bonuses, but he wants them to have no raises. Union members do want raises, and they say he's trying to charge them more for health care. Where it's about time to wrap up, but huge news that we haven't really gotten to with the Affordable Care Act. The Supreme Court in a 6-3 decision saying that, yes, states that did not set up their own marketplaces for people to go and buy insurance through, quote-unquote, Obamacare will be able to continue these subsidies. So, Andy, we have just about 1 minute left. What do you read of that Supreme Court decision? Some people were surprised by it. Good news for Illinois.
It's good news for the folks,
insurance.
the 230,000 or more who've relied on these subsidies coming from the federal government. It's also good news for the 6.4 million in America across the country who rely on the subsidies. It's not good news if you're a textualist, meaning you read the statutes like Justice Scalia by the letter. It's also good news for the folks who handicapped this, because a lot of people had predicted a 6-3 decision from the Supreme Court with Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kennedy both in the majority. So there is a lot going on there, but the Affordable Care Act survives again at the Supreme Court.
Barack Obama's best friend. I think they're going to do some golfing in 2017.
And I believe Scalia called it SCOTUS care in his dissent. So
among other things, yes.
Pure applesauce, I think, was one of the descriptions. So.
Well, and actually, Illinois Republicans have pointed to savings from the Obamacare Act, or whatever you want to call it, Affordable Care, as part of the reasons that they say it's plausible to go forward with some of the cuts that Governor Bruce Rauner has recommended. It's all part of this big budget tangle that we'll be following on CapitolView. You can follow that, of course, on Facebook. Check out CapitolView Politics. Thanks so much to Chris Mooney of the Institute of Government and Public Affairs.
That's it.
And also to the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin's Andy Maloney. I'm Illinois Public Radio's Amanda Vinicky. Thanks.